Well, good morning, St. Margaret's. Good to see you this morning. We had a great turnout at the 8 o'clock, and I look out on your smiling, I assume smiling, maybe frowning, who knows, your lovely faces. And it's a joy to be together on this first Sunday in Lent. I thought I'd just kind of dive in this morning with a story. I ran across this story this week after I read an article about a Utah man by the name of Bill, who was on a road trip in Montana for work. And it was a road trip, as I'll explain in a moment, that really went terribly awry. What happened is this. Bill was headed from Kalispell, Montana to Hayden. And he's going down the road, and his phone tells him to turn onto a gravel road, okay? According to his phone's GPS, Bill was going to save 45 minutes by taking something of a shortcut. Unfortunately, after Bill had already traveled about 18 miles down this gravel road, it began to snow. And shortly after that, Bill saw a sign that said, quote, "Unmaintained logging road." Needless to say, these are words you do not want to see in Montana in the snow 2 hours before darkness. It was right after he saw this sign for an unmaintained logging road that he heads down one hill and then fails to get up the next. He was stuck. He was trapped. And more than just stuck or trapped, he was totally isolated. I mean, he looked around and he didn't see a single track, much less even a sign of life. Though it was harrowing, to be sure, Bill survived the night in his car. He turned the engine on and then off, on and then off, in order to keep as warm as possible for as long as possible. And the first light of morning hits, and he decides he's only going to survive by moving. And so he heads out. And, unfortunately, things go from bad to worse because he sees on this path that he is walking down a fallen tree, and he kind of climbs this fallen tree, and he trips, and he breaks his leg quite badly. So at this point, he's just hobbling, trying to get as far as he can. And then he collapses. And he collapses just absolutely certain in the knowledge that he's going to perish. He actually recorded a video so that when he was found, his family would know that he loved them and cared for them. But, miraculously perhaps, at 4:45 the next morning, some 40 hours after trying to take a 45-minute shortcut, Bill was rescued. Hunters following a mountain lion followed tracks straight to Bill, and they were able to put him in their truck and get him to medical care. It's quite the story, isn't it? I read the story this week about Bill, and I feel like I learned a couple different lessons. The first is this: shortcuts can be a dangerous thing, right? Be wary of the allure of shortcuts. The second lesson is be careful who, or in this case, what, you listen to. Bill he was interviewed by the media after he was found, and in one of his interviews, he offers this absolutely fascinating quote. He said, quote, "My phone told me to take a turn that common sense would not have told you to take." End quote. Be careful who you listen to. Heard the story of Bill this week, and I got to say, I was also reminded of our gospel text this morning. It sort of cast, for me, our gospel text in a new light. So every year on the first Sunday in Lent, we hear this story of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. I love this story. I love hearing it on this Sunday because I find it so richly contoured and utterly fascinating. And this is a snapshot of Jesus that really, in a lot of ways, is somewhat unique in the Gospels. I mean, this is a chance to see the humanity of Jesus in a way that's really quite remarkable. I mean, Jesus now, this morning, is in the wilderness, and his life looks so different than it did just a few days before. Everything has changed. And Jesus is very hungry. He's alone. He's probably scared. And he is being tempted just as we are. This is an image of Jesus walking the path of human existence to its end, embracing everything it means to be human. Yet, as we shall see, all without sin. Now, I have to say, these temptations are rather puzzling. If you stop and really kind of consider them. I mean, you might be wondering, why are these temptations at all? I mean, is there something wrong with bread, or with authority, or with divine protection? No, there's nothing wrong with any of these things. We talked about in Epiphany, Jesus turning water into wine. Jesus is not above using divine power to engage in culinary arts, so to speak. More than that, I mean, Jesus is the one that we proclaim as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's the image of the invisible God. He's worthy of all honor and privilege. So what I want to submit to you is, it's not the what that matters here, it's the how and the who. That's what we're going to talk about this morning, the how and the who. The temptations offered to Jesus this morning, in the end, they're a series of shortcuts. I mean, they're images of Christ's future. Images that, for all intents and purposes, are the same as the future that God the Father has in mind for his Son. But they're inverted. They're upside down, they're inside out. They are the same and yet different. Yes, Jesus has the power to transform and to feed. But he's not meant to use that power for selfish ends. He's meant to feed others. Jesus has the power to exercise all authority on earth. But he's not going to do that if it means forsaking the command to worship God alone. Jesus, he's the recipient of all divine power, protection, and honor. But he's not going to call on those things if it means treating God as a means to an end. The one thing I want to share with you this morning, the one takeaway I have for you that I don't want you to miss, is that looming over these shortcuts, looming over these temptations, is the shadow of a cross. What these temptations have in common is that they're shortcuts to glory. Seeking to bypass the sacrifice. What Jesus is hearing this morning is this: pursue the way of pride as opposed to the way of weakness. Build yourself up instead of giving yourself away. Become the hero without first becoming the savior. Pursue the crown without taking up your cross. Brothers and sisters, these are shortcuts that promise life, but in the end, they would have resulted only in one thing: death. Our death. The way of love that Christ lived and shared, the way of love that Christ embodied, it cannot be extracted from the reality of sacrifice. That path of humanity that I described a moment ago, that Jesus was meant to walk down, it was always going to walk unto even death. And all for our sake. So that's the what, or the how, rather. I want to turn now to the question of who. Who or what are we listening to? I'll be honest with you. It is my conviction that genuine Christian formation may be the single most pressing challenge for faith communities in 2022. And I mean that for all faith communities. It doesn't matter whether you are progressive or conservative, mainline or evangelical, high church, low church. Genuine Christian formation is so difficult in this time and place. We are all being formed, whether we realize it or not. We are all listening to voices, whether we realize it or not. And some of those forces, some of those voices are from God, while others are indifferent or even opposed to God. Some of these voices advocate for peace, forgiveness, for sacrifice, and for love, while others clamor only for violence, shame, and self-advancement. And what I love about the season that we now find ourselves in, what I love about Lent, is that today, this morning, this moment is a really good opportunity to ask that critical question again. What or whom are we listening to? What are the voices in our lives? And are those voices in our lives spurring us on to love and sacrifice? Are we being careful about how we're being formed? One of the other gifts of Lent is it's the chance to ask those questions, and it's a chance to reflect on how, if we stop and we really consider ourselves, we have to admit that where Jesus was faithful, we so often stumble. Where Jesus was faithful, we so often stumble. Friends, we face the same temptations that Jesus faced 2,000 years ago. I mean, for us, it looks a little different, right? We don't have miraculous power to turn stones into bread, per se. We don't have all authority and power. We don't have legions of angels. But we have our own good things that we might want to take shortcuts to find. And we have that temptation that's everywhere in our world to put our ease, our control, our desires, our preferences, our pride at the very center of our lives and our communities. But to do so is sin. I mean, none of us gathered here this morning, online or in person, none of us exist at the center of our universe. God does. God's call is not for us to live easy, pleasant, self-absorbed lives. God's call, rather, is for us to give ourselves away, to offer ourselves to our community, to our neighbors, to our loved ones, to our enemies. sacrifice our needs and wants for the sake of others, to seek after Jesus, to listen to the voice of Jesus, no matter where it is he goes or no matter where it is he calls us. But these things require sacrifice. They require risk. They say no to shortcuts and yes to crosses. Crosses that we pick up and walk that road to Jerusalem that Jesus walked 2,000 years ago. It's hard being reminded that we stumble. It's hard being reminded that more than just tempted, we falter and we fail. It's hard to be reminded that we go astray. We go astray in the wilderness. We go astray in the ordinary lives we usually live. A lot of our days feel more like failures than triumphs. But, in the midst of that, this season, this morning, is about so much hope as well. One of my favorite passages in all of the New Testament is that passage in Hebrews, where the author of Hebrews tells us, assures us that we are not without an empathetic high priest, because Jesus was tempted just as we are, yet did not sin. When we encounter those moments when we want to make things about us, when we want to take the shortcut, when we want to put ourselves at the center of it all, my hope and my encouragement is that we would listen to the quiet voice of that profoundly empathetic high priest. If we listen, we would hear that Jesus remembers those moments too. Jesus is with us in those moments. We are not alone. If we listen, we might hear about a grace that can change everything. Friends, we are not without an empathetic high priest. The path that Jesus walked went through a wilderness and a temptation greater than anything you or I might ever experience. Walked down a road so uncertain, yet deadly certain. A road that ended in Jerusalem. Jesus stands ready to be with us, wherever we are and whenever we fall. All we have to do is seek him out. All we have to do is listen. All we have to do is remember. And all we have to do is trust. Trust that the one who never fell is strong enough to carry us. Amen.